The rain was fine but persistent, turning the asphalt into a slick, dark surface. Puddles reflected the lit streetlights, and the neighborhood seemed quieter than usual. Melissa was arranging the flower pots at the entrance of the flower shop with mechanical movements. She adjusted the ferns and sunflowers, but her eyes were empty. A leak dripped directly onto the wooden counter. She placed a small bucket under it, let out a long sigh, and returned to the door with her apron soaked. That's when she heard the sound, a sputtering engine. A black, expensive-looking car came to a sudden stop right in front of the shop. Melissa glanced over, expecting the driver to try again, but he didn't. A tall man in a dark suit got out of the car, looked at the hood with an expressionless face and began to push it on his own. Without thinking, Melissa dropped the pot she was holding and ran to him, already stepping into the rain. "Need a hand?" Melissa asked, not waiting for an answer. He nodded, surprised. He hadn't expected help, especially not in that downpour. They began pushing the car slowly, side by side, their shoulders straining against the weight of the vehicle. The rain poured down hard, soaking every bit of clothing, running down their faces, their arms, their eyes squinting with effort. The car was heavy, the ground slippery, but the situation was so absurd, so out of control, that amid the struggle, they started laughing. Laughing like people who recognize the ridiculousness of life. Like those who know that sometimes all you can do is laugh so you don't drown. They stopped a few meters later, breathless. She rested her hands on her knees, taking deep breaths. He looked at her, still trying to make sense of what had just happened. She looked back, her eyes slightly averted, not knowing exactly what to say. "Good thing I was still at the shop," Melissa commented, trying to sound casual, but her voice came out almost shy. "Imagine how long you'd be stuck there, in this downpour." She glanced at him, tried to play it off, but it was impossible not to notice the broad shoulders under the soaked shirt, the serious face. He seemed too composed for someone in such a vulnerable situation, and at the same time, lost, as if he had come from somewhere very far away and didn't yet know how to get back. "There's a mechanic 3 blocks from here," she said at last. "I can take you there if you want," said Melissa. He hesitated. The silence between them felt heavier for a moment, as if he were weighing the risks, the limits, the strangeness. But then he simply nodded, agreeing without a word. They got into her car, an old hatchback with a lavender scent mixed with the smell of wet newspaper. And something else, a sweet, subtle fragrance, like crushed flowers forgotten on the back seat. Petal crumbs were scattered everywhere, mixed with crumpled wrappers, notebooks, and shopping bags. She drove slowly, tense, her hands gripping the steering wheel. The rain was heavy, the wipers struggling to keep up. The headlights cut through the water, creating a path that felt longer than it was, and yet in that moment it seemed far too distant. The street had deep potholes, puddles so large they looked like small lakes. The car jolted with each bump, and she slowed down even more. "Thank you very much for your help," he said, not really understanding everything that was happening. He was squeezed into the passenger seat. His legs, too long for the small car, nearly touched the dashboard. He observed the interior, cramped, chaotic, alive. The flowers, the scents, the dust. But what struck him most was her scent. It was that aroma that filled everything, subtle and persistent, like something that sneaks in and doesn't want to leave. "No problem," said Melissa. "I'm sure you do the same for me, right?" And a small side smile. He looked at her hands on the wheel, firm, her fingers tense. Her face was tilted forward, almost pressed against the glass, straining to see through the relentless rain. Her wet hair clung to her neck, stuck to her skin. And even in that situation, driving through a storm with a stranger beside her, no names exchanged, no guarantees, she was being kind, and he didn't understand. Not with the logic he was used to. Not after everything he had seen of the world. Why was she doing this? Why stop, help, offer a ride, talk? But in the midst of the confusion of questions, he felt something he couldn't explain. It wasn't just the kindness, it was the way she seemed real. The way that moment, dirty, wet, out of context, felt more genuine than anything else he had experienced lately. When they arrived at the repair shop, Raoul, one of the mechanics, came running out to assist. When the man got out of the car, the tone changed immediately. "I've got it from here, Mr. Gates." Melissa froze for a second. "Mr. Gates?" She found it odd, but since he didn't say anything, neither did she. He turned to offer to pay for the gas, but she turned away and said, "Of course not, it was just help." That gesture left him speechless. Before he could say anything, she just nodded and said, "See you." Then she backed up and returned to her shop. She didn't look at him as she walked into the warehouse. On her way back, she caught herself smiling at the thought of him. "Geez, Melissa, for heaven's sake, it was just a ride. What a trip, you lunatic," she said out loud to herself in the car. Later, already back at the flower shop, Melissa tried to focus on the pending orders, but her mind wouldn't cooperate. Every bouquet she started was interrupted by a memory. The car in the rain, the silence during the ride, his gaze fixed on the window. The flowers scattered on the counter seemed to blur behind the thoughts that kept coming back. That's when Chloe showed up, walking through the glass door of the neighboring shop with her usual mischievous smile. She worked at the stationery store next door, and between deliveries always found time to stop by the flower shop, even if just for 5 minutes with a coffee in hand. She was a friend, a confidant, and most of all an expert at sniffing out when Melissa was acting differently. She came in carrying 2 steaming cups. "Who was that handsome guy you were helping, huh?" Chloe asked, handing over the coffee like someone delivering a provocation. Melissa tried to play it cool, tidying up the papers on the counter. "Oh, just a ride. His car broke down," she replied, forcing a casual tone, but her voice came out softer than she wanted. Chloe raised an eyebrow, amused. "Right. Even I wouldn't mind giving a ride like that," she said with a teasing laugh as she leaned against the counter. Melissa laughed too, but felt her face heat up. "Stop it, you're being ridiculous," she replied, already blushing, and hid her smile behind the cup. They laughed together as they always did. Chloe was the kind of friend who knew exactly what to say at the right time, and also knew when to say nothing. She didn't press. She just stayed there, sharing coffee and the moment, letting Melissa return to her thoughts in her own time. Even with the scent of fresh flowers in the air, it was the perfume of memory that dominated the afternoon. When the workday finally ended, Melissa climbed the narrow stairs of the old building with wet feet and a tired body. The second floor creaked under her steps, as if time had left marks on every floorboard of that forgotten place. The key turned with a soft click, and she pushed the door open with her shoulder. The yellowish light of the corner lamp came on with a gentle click, revealing her small refuge. The apartment was simple, but filled with history in every detail. Books stacked in disarray next to the armchair, a shelf with mismatched mugs, all scavenged from fairs, and plants that stubbornly grew by the window, even without constant sun. She took off her wet shoes at the door, unhurried. Every movement felt like a silent ritual of rest. The cold floor under her feet contrasted with the soft warmth coming from inside. She walked into the living room, and without thinking much, tied up her damp hair with a pencil forgotten on the side table. Then she let herself fall onto the low, worn-out sofa, with mismatched cushions she had sewn over the years. The checkered blanket that covered the couch like protection from time still carried a scent that transported her. It was the same smell of the old sofa at her parents' house, a mix of neutral soap, old wood, and Sunday afternoons, a scent of home, of childhood. She pulled the blanket up to her chin and closed her eyes for a moment, hearing only the sound of the light rain tapping against the window. That small place, hidden in the middle of the city, was all she had. But there, wrapped in silence and memory, she closed her eyes. It came back again with unsettling clarity, the steady yet quiet gaze. The chiseled jaw, even more pronounced with rain-soaked features. The smile that wasn't quite a smile, more like a discreet, restrained curve, as if he had forgotten how to relax. And the way, too calm, too silent, as if he carried a world inside but chose not to share it. She relived it all in fragments, the strength with which they pushed the car. The moment he agreed to get into her car, without asking her name, without giving his. But the mechanic had said it. Mr. Gates. Who is this man? She wondered. Is he someone's driver? Or could he be? She shook her head as if trying to rid herself of a stubborn thought. But it didn't help. The feeling was still there. a light yet constant unease, as if he had left an impression inside her, not through words, since they'd barely spoken, but in some deeper layer. He had affected her in a strange way, effortlessly, without apparent intention, as if he had shifted something out of place and left without realizing. And the most absurd thing of all was that she didn't even know his name. On the other side of the city, wrapped in the almost clinical silence of a mirrored glass building, Morgan Gates walked alone across the penthouse lobby. The recessed lighting cast a cold elegance over the light marble. No sound except the faint echo of his own footsteps. The door clicked shut behind him, too subtle a sound for such emptiness. He didn't turn on any lights. Let the darkness remain as it was. His jacket, still wet from the rain, was tossed to the floor without ceremony. The tie fell onto the chair in an automatic, almost tired motion. His shoes were left behind on the way to the bar, a refined piece of dark wood hidden in a discreet alcove of the spacious living room. Without hurry, he picked up a crystal glass. His fingers, long and precise, poured the whiskey with the kind of calm that only comes when the world inside your head is too loud. He brought the glass to his lips and drank slowly. The hot liquid burned down his throat and warmed his chest, but it wasn't warmth he needed. He stopped in front of the panoramic window. The city stretched out below him like a model of glass and concrete, lit up, noisy, alive, and yet so distant, so indifferent. It was as if he were watching it all from the outside, even while standing at the center. What a crazy woman, what a crazy situation, Morgan thought with a smile on his face. He went to the bathroom. The modern bathtub, embedded in black marble, reflected the soft ceiling lights. He turned on the hot water and waited for the tub to fill. Steam began to rise. He took off the rest of his clothes and stepped in, letting his body slowly sink. The water enveloped him like a warm weight. He rested the back of his neck on the cold edge of the tub, eyes closed. The name was still a mystery, but her face, Morgan thought. It came like a flash, vivid, far too intimate for such a short time. The strand of wet hair stuck to her cheek, the way she gripped the steering wheel, her eyes straining through the rain, the spontaneous smile when they laughed at the absurdity of pushing a car under a downpour. And the silence, the comfortable silence that formed between them, with no need to fill it. She helped him without knowing who he was, no questions, no rush, no effort to impress. Morgan kept his eyes closed, but something inside was stirring, small, unsettling, as if, for a brief moment, he had been seen, not as Mr. Gates, but as a soaked man in the middle of the street, just another stranger. And no matter how much he tried to distract himself, he couldn't get it out of his head. What an intriguing woman, Morgan thought. It wasn't just her face, it was the feeling she left behind. Something hard to explain, almost impossible to name. She had awakened something old in him, forgotten, like a dormant memory that refuses to fade away. The memory of his mother's kitchen came suddenly, the warmth of the oven on a cold late afternoon, the smell of freshly baked bread, butter melting slowly, laughter echoing through the house, simple, unpretentious voices, a time when hands still touched without suspicion, when life wasn't about contracts, figures, and private security, a time when people simply helped each other, without expecting anything in return, just because. He opened his eyes. The ceiling seemed too far away, high, white, impersonal. The entire penthouse felt at that moment far too empty. He slowly lifted the crystal glass, took another sip of whiskey, the strong taste burning slowly. And there, amid the steam and the silence, her face appeared again. Not like a random memory, but like a presence. The way she held the steering wheel, determined, even without seeing much through the rain. The way she spoke simply, without pretense, without trying to be something she wasn't. The quiet firmness in her eyes, the unintentional courage of someone who lives each day as it comes, without seeking recognition. Morgan Gates, the man who had built empires, who had watched partners betray his trust, who had learned to see the world as a survival game, felt something light up inside his chest. It wasn't big, but it was warm. And for a real moment, for the first time in so long, He wasn't thinking about business, nor profits, nor risks. He was thinking about her. His thoughts still wandered, caught on the image of her holding the wheel, when his phone vibrated on the counter next to the bathtub. He stretched out his arm, picked up the device slowly, in no rush to return to the real world. The screen showed the name Carlos, his driver and personal assistant for over 6 years. Morgan had dismissed him earlier that day without explanation. He simply said he needed to be alone. Carlos, as always, got the message and asked no questions. That's how their relationship worked. Professional, discreet, but built on trust over time. The message was straightforward. "What time tomorrow, sir?" Morgan typed quickly. 7 a.m. But before that, I need a favor. Discreetly investigate a flower shop on the corner of 16th and 5th. Old facade, I couldn't see the name. I want to know who owns it, how the business works, everything you can find, and keep this just between us. Minutes later, a short reply. Understood. He placed the phone back on the counter and leaned again, eyes fixed on the ceiling blurred by the steam. It wasn't suspicion, it wasn't paranoia, it was just curiosity. He wanted to understand who that woman was, not just because of what she had done, but because of what she had stirred in him. Melissa hadn't treated him like a businessman, nor like someone with a last name that opened doors. She helped because she wanted to, without knowing who he was, without expecting anything in return. And now he wondered if there was some way, even a small one, to return that kindness. But for now, all he wanted was to know more about her. Carlos read the message once more before slipping the phone into his jacket pocket. It wasn't the first time Mr. Gates had asked for something off script, but this time there was a different tone, a subtle detail, almost imperceptible, but one he recognized clearly after so many years by his boss's side. Morgan Gates wasn't a man prone to idle curiosity. Every step, every order was always part of a strategy, a cold, calculated, almost clinical move. But now it was about a flower shop. Carlos stopped at home just to change clothes. He put on something more casual, dark jeans, a linen shirt, discreet sneakers. He knew he couldn't attract attention. He took the backup car from the garage, no black SUV with tinted windows. That night required discretion. He crossed the city calmly, obeying traffic lights, observing every corner like someone studying the board. He parked 1 block from 16th and 5th, turned off the car, got out and walked, blending into the city's rainy night. And there it was. The facade was indeed old, with faded paint and a weather-worn sign. But there was a quiet charm to the place. A dim light came from inside, revealing wooden shelves with pots and bouquets. Carlos did what he did best, investigate discreetly. He checked public records, accessed legal databases, cross-referenced information with the agility of someone who already anticipated what his boss would want to know, even without being told. That's how he found out. Melissa Aurora Ferreira, only child. Graduated with honors in botany from a renowned university, with a promising academic future. Praised publications, invitations from international institutes. But just over 5 years ago, she gave it all up. Career, scholarships, projects, to take over her family's small flower shop right after the tragic death of her parents in a car accident. The business, according to records, had been operating on the edge. No serious debt, but far from profitable. Melissa didn't invest in expansion, didn't upgrade the store's systems. She ran everything on her own. Carlos got back in the car, started the engine, and before driving off typed, "Information collected. I'll send you everything in the morning. Shop name, Aurora. Owner, Melissa Aurora Ferreira. Small local business, very well regarded in the area." And before hitting send on impulse, he added, "There's something beautiful about this place, feels like it's out of time." Message sent. The sun had barely risen when Melissa turned on the kitchen light with a lazy click. The floor was cold beneath her bare feet, and the silence in the house made time feel like it moved more slowly in there. She opened the cupboard, grabbed the old coffee tin and put the water on to boil. The kettle let out a soft hiss as she placed her favorite mug, the blue ceramic one with a small crack on the handle, a gift from her mother. As the aroma of coffee spread, Melissa leaned against the counter, eyes fixed on nothing. She thought about the rain the night before, the weight of the car, the unexpected laughter, the comfortable silence. She thought about the man, about the way he accepted help as if he didn't know how to deal with kindness. She thought about what the mechanic had said. Mr. Gates. Who was he really? She stirred her spoon inside the mug without noticing. Part of her told her to forget it, but another part already knew she wouldn't be able to. Her mind wandered through scattered images, the restrained smile, his eyes, the moment he simply turned his back and disappeared. But his presence had remained, and now it seemed to occupy every corner of the small apartment. That's when her phone alarm rang, slicing through her thoughts like a blade. Oh my God. She dropped the mug in the sink and ran to the bedroom. She threw on the first clothes she found, tied her hair into a messy bun, and slipped on the sneakers that were still a bit damp from the previous day's rain. Threw on her coat, grabbed her bag and keys almost without thinking. She shut the door in a rush, still adjusting the strap of her bag on her shoulder. It was time to return to the flower shop. But nothing in her felt like the day before. The next morning, Carlos arrived at the penthouse precisely at 6:45 a.m. He wore the same discreet outfit from the night before, as if he didn't want the details of the mission to be diluted by more formal attire. Morgan was already awake. He hadn't slept much. He had spent part of the night staring at the ceiling, listening to the city's muffled sounds through the thick apartment walls. When Carlos entered, he found his boss silent, standing by the panoramic window, a forgotten cup of coffee in his hand. Without a word, Carlos placed the black folder on the coffee table. Morgan turned slowly, his eyes slightly red but alert. "Here's everything you asked for," Carlos said in his usual neutral tone, though with a hint of care in his voice. "Public records, legal history, financial profile, personal details, and some observations from the visit." Morgan sat on the couch without responding right away. He just opened the folder. He pulled out the first sheet, her full name at the top, an old archive photo, her academic grades, published articles. He recognized names of professors he himself had funded in projects years ago. Page by page, Melissa began to take shape like a map of improbable choices. A brilliant young woman with everything lined up for a prestigious career, who decided to abandon it all for a flower shop inherited from her parents. A business barely staying afloat. There was no strategy in that, no gain, no measurable return, just feeling. And that unsettled him. He turned another page, stopped at the report of her parents' death. The accident, the report, the date 5 years ago. Her life had been turned upside down, and instead of running, she stayed. Instead of rebuilding elsewhere, she rebuilt right there, with flowers, with time. Morgan leaned back on the couch and took a deep breath. "She gave everything up because of the shop," he said, more to himself than to Carlos. "That's what it seems," Carlos replied cautiously, "but not out of weakness. She's resilient." Morgan kept his gaze on the last page. Carlos's words echoed like a confirmation of something he still couldn't explain. Resilient. He didn't know what he was looking for when he ordered the investigation. But now, something in him did. That woman wasn't a coincidence in the rain. She was a question mark he couldn't ignore. He closed the folder with a firm gesture, stood up. "Get the car ready." But not the usual one. "Are you going over there?" Morgan gave a small nod. He adjusted the cuffs of his shirt, grabbed a light jacket, and looked one last time at the city through the window. For the first time in years, he wasn't going to a meeting, nor to check on a strategic asset. He was going to see someone who knew nothing about him. And for some reason, that felt more important than any contract he had ever signed. 2 days later, the sky was still overcast, but the rain had stopped. Melissa was watering the flowers in the shop window with care, as if each drop needed to fall in the right place. She was still thinking about him, not with idealization, but because of how strange everything had been. The image of that man pushing the car in the rain in a suit wouldn't leave her mind, nor the way the garage had treated him. Mr. Gates. She was distracted when she heard the sound of a smooth engine. A shiny black sedan with a uniformed driver parked precisely in front of the flower shop. Melissa frowned. That was far too unusual for the neighborhood. From the back seat, Morgan stepped out. No suit this time, just a light dress shirt, open blazer, and a calm look. The same quiet presence. Morgan entered the flower shop as if he had been there before. The bell above the door chimed softly, and he paused for a moment, breathing in the air filled with moisture, fresh earth, and the delicate scent of the day's flowers. Everything there moved at a different rhythm, slower, almost intimate. Melissa dropped the watering can as soon as she saw him. She tensed up. Her hands were still wet, her apron stained with soil, but what froze her was his gaze. "I thought you fixed your car," Melissa said, trying to break the tension. But Morgan's response came with calm firmness. It wasn't the car that had brought him there. He approached slowly, unhurried, respecting the space as if he were stepping onto something fragile. "I'm the owner of the building," said Morgan, his voice calm, as if that information meant nothing. "But I didn't come here as a landlord." Melissa furrowed her brow slightly, trying to process what she was hearing. "Morgan, I came as someone who was reminded of something important." She crossed her arms, a mix of defense and confusion. She still didn't know what to believe. "Melissa, look, if you came to thank me, it's fine. It was just a gesture. I didn't do it for anything. I don't want—" "Morgan, I know. That's why I'm here." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was dense, heavy with something neither of them could name. "Morgan, you reminded me of a time when I was a nobody too. When I still walked everywhere, got caught in the rain, and some people, without knowing who I was, helped me, just because." Melissa looked away. It touched her more than she cared to admit. Something stirred inside her, and she didn't know if it was empathy or fear. She looked away again. It unsettled her. That's when he said why he had really come. He wanted to propose a partnership, a real investment in the flower shop, not as a businessman seeking profit, but as someone who saw value there, in her, in the space, in the story. Melissa let out a nervous laugh, like someone trying to dodge the absurdity of the idea. "You're joking, right?" she said, smiling in disbelief, though her eyes had a sparkle she tried to hide. "This is starting to feel like a soap opera," she added, trying to break the ice. Fiddling with the flowers, Melissa said, "This is just a tiny flower shop with a leaky ceiling, cracked pots, and overdue bills. There's no glamour, no quick return, not even much space, really." She said it like someone who had gone through that list many times out loud, as a shield against expectations. But now, in that moment, her own words sounded different, as if, for the first time, someone had truly heard them. Morgan shrugged. "I'm not looking for returns, I'm looking for meaning." She fell silent, trying to figure out if it was a joke, but his gaze was clear. "And why here? Why me?" she asked, stopping everything she was doing. "Because you're real," he replied, looking into her eyes. "And I'm tired of everything that isn't," Morgan said as he stepped closer to her. The shop door opened, interrupting the moment. A customer walked in, looking for a bouquet for his mother-in-law. Melissa took a deep breath, smiled professionally, and went to help him. Morgan watched her for a while, then gave a nod of thanks and waited quietly in the corner. As soon as she finished, she walked over before he could say anything. Morgan lifted his gaze, firm but gentle. "Let's start over," he said, his voice low, almost as if asking permission for something bigger than just an invitation. "Dinner, as a thank you." He stepped toward her and took her hands in his hands holding hers, warm, real. Melissa felt her heart race, like she was about to cross an invisible line between the familiar and the improbable. For a moment, the sound of the shop faded. There were no flowers, no bills, no complicated plans, just joined hands, a simple invitation, and a look that said far more than words ever could. She didn't respond immediately, but she didn't pull away either. Melissa kept her eyes on his hands for a moment. The firmness of his grip contrasted with the storm swirling inside her. It was all too unexpected. A man like Morgan Gates standing there in the middle of her run-down flower shop, holding her hands with that calm look, as if he had found something he hadn't even known he was searching for. She hesitated, out of instinct, out of caution, out of not knowing exactly where she was standing. The silence between them felt full of meaning, and for a second she wanted to step back, but she didn't. She took a deep breath, trying to anchor herself in some logic, and found none. And maybe that's why she decided to let herself go. Melissa lifted her gaze, a soft smile forming on her lips. 7:30. I closed the shop at 7, she said, offering her answer with care, still unsure where this would lead. Morgan's eyes lit up with a lightness he hadn't felt in a long time. He smiled sincerely, not the formal smile of boardrooms, but one that came from a simpler, more genuine place. He let go of her hands slowly, respectfully, like returning something precious to its place, and without saying another word, he simply nodded and turned toward the door. As he left, the bell above the door rang again, but this time, it didn't sound like a goodbye. It felt more like the beginning of something else. Melissa stood still for a moment, watching the door close. There were still flowers to water, orders to arrange, bills to tally, but nothing felt quite the same. For the first time in a long time, she was looking forward to something. Hours later, in the upper floor of a corporate building, Morgan entered his office and called his assistant. "I'd like to place a flower order," he said. "A big one, for all the women in the office." Anna, the secretary, raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Mixed roses. Order directly from Melissa's flower shop." "Name on the card?" she asked. "None, anonymous, but make it nice. A large order, 1,000 roses," he said. "Just don't let the shop owner know it's from our company, then distribute them to all the female employees as a subtle thank you for their dedication." The secretary took notes without asking questions. Morgan twirled his pen between his fingers, but his mind was far away, thinking about everything that had happened and the strange alignments of fate. Melissa was alone in the shop, arranging the newly delivered flowers, focused on trimming stems and choosing the right ribbons, when the door burst open. Chloe walked in as usual, unannounced, full of energy, nearly knocking the bell off the handle. "I saw that man here again," she said, already approaching with narrowed, curious eyes. "Come on, tell me. Who is he?" Chloe said in a teasing tone. She sat on the stool beside the counter like someone who wasn't leaving without answers. Melissa kept her eyes on her work, trying to stay composed. A smile threatened to break through and she lowered her face, focusing on the ribbon she was tying. "No one, just a different kind of customer," she said in a restrained voice, trying to sound casual. But Chloe noticed, of course she did. She jumped up, pointing like she had uncovered a secret. "Oh, I knew it. You're glowing. It's him, isn't it?" Melissa didn't answer. She stayed silent, the smile still hidden at the corner of her lips. There was a glow in her eyes that didn't match the grey life she had lived for years. Chloe softened her tone then. She stepped closer and spoke with more tenderness, almost in a whisper. "Since your parents died, you buried yourself in this shop, Mel. I know, I saw it, and I really do understand. But you deserve to be taken care of too." Melissa felt the weight of those words, not because she didn't know, but because it had been a long time since someone said it out loud. She took a deep breath, turned her eyes back to the flowers, and resumed her work without replying. But inside, something had shifted. Chloe noticed, and this time, she respected the silence. At 5:45 p.m., Melissa locked up the flower shop. The sound of the key turning echoed louder than usual, as if it marked not just the end of a workday, but the beginning of something completely off script. She climbed the stairs of her building with slightly tense shoulders, her thoughts racing. The dinner, the proposal, the absurd idea of a business partnership with a man she barely knew, but who seemed to see something in her no one else ever had. Could it be real? Inside the apartment, everything looked the same. Stacked books, thirsty plants, the checkered blanket on the couch. But she felt different in that space. As if suddenly, that intimate place was about to witness a new version of herself. She walked to the bedroom and slowly opened the wardrobe. She stood still for a few minutes, staring at the clothes as if reviewing an entire past. Worn-out t-shirts, soft fabric pants, dresses used for supplier meetings. Nothing in there had been chosen to be seen, only to be practical. She ran her fingers over a simple blue linen dress. It was the closest she had to something that could be called beautiful. It had modest sleeves, a soft fit, and the kind of elegance that didn't scream. She laid it on the bed and looked at herself in the mirror. She tied her hair back with care, leaving a few loose strands. She applied a bit of lipstick, hesitating. Looked again. She didn't fully recognize herself, but she didn't reject what she saw either. While slipping on her shoes, she felt her heart start to race. Dinner. A business proposal. With Morgan Gates. She wondered if she was being naive, if it wasn't dangerous to make space for someone who came from a world so different from hers. A man of empires, numbers, quick decisions. She built from roots, patience, and time. But then she thought about the way he held her hands. There was no rush, no empty promise. There was respect, a gaze that hadn't reduced her to numbers, but had seen value where so many others saw a small business destined to stay small. And what if, for the first time in a long while, life was offering her a real chance? Not to start over from scratch, but to start differently, with someone by her side. Melissa took a deep breath, grabbed her bag, looked around the apartment with affection, turned off the lights, and descended the stairs with slow but steady steps. That night, she wasn't just the owner of a leaky flower shop. She was a woman crossing her own fear, ready, even if uncertain, to live whatever might come next. The restaurant was on a quiet street, just a few blocks from the shop. Melissa walked slowly, feeling the night breeze play with the loose ends of her hair. The city lights shimmered on the wet windshields of parked cars, and shop windows reflected her silhouette as she passed. Each step was a blend of doubt and courage. The place wasn't luxurious, but it had charm. Soft lighting, small tables with low candles, and the subtle scent of baked bread drifting through the door. It was the kind of place that felt suspended in time, cozy, almost intimate. She stepped in carefully, like someone unsure if they were in the right place. The maitre d' smiled and led her to a table in the corner near the window. And there he was. Morgan was already waiting. No blazer, a light shirt, sleeves rolled up. When he saw her, he stood with that same calm look, the look of someone who respects other people's timing, even after a life spent racing against his own. "You came," he said softly, with a smile that didn't try too hard. Melissa just smiled back, not sure how to respond without sounding too obvious. She sat down, took the bag off her shoulder, adjusted her dress with a shy gesture. She still felt out of place, as if testing a new skin. But he made her feel safe, made it okay not to know exactly how to act. For a few seconds, only the sound of the restaurant filled the space between them. Cutlery, quiet laughter, the muffled hum of the kitchen in the back. "Not exactly how you imagined your Thursday night, huh?" Morgan said, trying to lighten the mood. Melissa laughed, nervous. "Not how I imagined the whole year, actually." He smiled more broadly, and for a moment he looked younger, less CEO, more man. "I know this all feels a little too fast, too strange, but I don't do this often." Melissa looked up and met his gaze with more firmness for the first time. "Neither do I. Actually, the last time I went out for dinner like this was many years ago, before everything changed." Morgan nodded slowly, understanding without needing to ask. He knew how life could divide you into two, before and after a loss. The waiter approached discreetly. They ordered something simple. He let her choose. The silence between them this time wasn't discomfort, it was presence. It was the time two people need to trust, even when they don't fully understand why. As they talked, Melissa gradually relaxed. Slowly, her laughter became easier. Words flowed with less effort. She talked about the shop, the flowers, how some plants seemed to respond to her mood. He listened like someone who was there to stay. When dinner ended, Morgan didn't talk about investments or business. He simply walked her to the door, and as they left, gently offered his arm. She accepted lightly, and that gesture, simple as it was, moved her in a way no formal proposal ever could. That night, no contracts were signed, but something quietly had begun. As Melissa spoke, gesturing softly while describing how certain flowers understood the weather, Morgan watched her with a rare kind of attention. Not the kind he usually gave in meetings, that strategic, rational, calculated analysis. This was different. It was quiet, almost reverent. Her eyes sparkled when she spoke of the little things, the joy of seeing an orchid bloom again, the irritation with rose thorns, the fear of losing what her parents had left behind. She spoke with her whole heart, even as she tried to appear restrained, and Morgan, without realizing it, was allowing himself to feel. For a long time he hadn't. Life had taught him to be objective, to eliminate what didn't offer returns, people, places, memories. It was easier to live surrounded by contracts and forecasts than to let something truly touch him. But there, in that dimly lit restaurant, with a simple dish in front of him and a woman who refused to be anything but herself, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Morgan watched the way she fidgeted with the napkin between her fingers, how her eyes narrowed when she remembered her childhood, and the soft laugh that escaped when she surprised herself with her own stories. It was all so authentic it felt almost fragile, and he, someone used to breaking fragile things without guilt, felt a strange fear of ruining it. Why did she stir him so deeply? There was no effort in Melissa, no attempt to impress, to seem better, and that's exactly why she disarmed him. He, who had known the worst in people's intentions, now sat across from someone who helped him without knowing his name, who looked at him with no interest and still made him feel important. Morgan wondered if this was just gratitude, or loneliness, or something else, but deep down he knew it was the way she looked at the world, as if, despite the losses, beauty was still possible. And there he was, a man who built empires to protect himself, wanting, for the first time in a long while, simply to stay a little longer. Dessert had already been cleared from the table, but neither of them seemed in a hurry to leave. The tone of their conversation had shifted. They were more relaxed, closer. The kind of silence that now settled between them wasn't hesitation, it was harmony. Melissa rested her chin on her hand, gazing out the window, speaking dreamily about a trip she'd like to take someday. Morgan didn't say anything for a moment. He just watched how light she became when she allowed herself to dream. Then Morgan gave a subtle nod to the waiter, signaling for the bill. Everything about him was restrained, but that gesture carried a quiet resolve, like someone who knew the night was drawing to a close, but also that what truly mattered had already been said, even without words. As they waited, Melissa ran her fingers along the rim of her empty glass, unsure whether she wanted time to pass or pause right there. Morgan watched her in silence, with that attentive, almost protective gaze and a flicker of light in his eyes. "That was a good dinner," she said, as if recognizing something rare. "I'm glad you said yes," he replied, with a soft smile. "I would have insisted." Melissa laughed, this time without holding back, and in that final glance before the bill arrived, there was more than the end of a night. There was the promise of something that might just be beginning. As they stepped outside, he looked at her. Morgan leaned closer and asked, "How about one last drink at my place?" She hesitated for a moment, then nodded with a small smile. The penthouse was quiet and elegant. Low lighting reflected off the windows overlooking the city. Morgan prepared the drinks slowly. Melissa looked around curiously. The closed piano, the neatly arranged books, the kitchen that looked barely used. "You really live here?" she asked playfully. "I do, but I don't inhabit it. If that's what you're wondering," he said, stepping closer, while Melissa stood there, caught between desire and hesitation. She smiled, understanding more than he said. They sat on the couch with drinks in hand. He spoke of the divorce, the betrayal of his ex-wife, how it had frozen something inside him, how since then he'd distanced himself from anything involving affection. "But that gesture of yours, it was different. Real. It made my world feel less artificial." Melissa shared about her parents, the accident, the fear of losing the flower shop, the loneliness of having to handle everything alone. The words came easily with him, as if she finally had a place to set them down. The silence between them was full of meaning, full of pause, full of listening. Then naturally came the kiss. There was no rush, no impulse. It was a soft movement, like recognizing something that had been there from the beginning. Morgan slid his hand to her waist, pulling her close with both firmness and care, as if saying without words, "You can come as you are." Melissa's body responded without resistance. She gave herself to the moment as someone who finally let something good happen without needing to justify it. She didn't think about what came next, or the questions. In that moment, there was only now. The warmth of the touch, the strength of the embrace, the kiss that carried all the silence that came before. Morgan felt Melissa's body fit against his with a dangerous kind of ease. His fingers slid along her waist, firm as if trying to memorize her by the feel of her skin beneath the soft fabric of her dress. Every movement was measured, not with haste, but with desire. She's real, Morgan thought, so absurdly real. Melissa tilted her head slightly back as his lips neared hers. Her breathing grew uneven, not from doubt but from surrender. Her eyes closed, her skin sensitive, her heart pounding in her chest. It had been years since anyone had touched her like this, with calm, with hunger and respect at the same time. Her body grew warmer by the second. Is this what it feels like when someone awakens you from the inside out? Melissa wondered. Morgan's fingers slid up her back, tracing the line of her spine with a slowness that burned. He stopped at the nape of her neck, fingers threading into her hair, pulling gently just enough to look at her. She opened her eyes, and in that instant, there were no defenses. No shock, no pain, no losses, just her and him. He rested his forehead against hers and smiled softly, as if asking permission to go further, even though he had already been accepted. The kisses grew deeper, as if carrying all the questions never asked, and all the answers the body already knew by heart. Melissa held his face in her hands, pulling him closer, wanting to erase any remaining distance. His hands slid down the sides of her body with a maddening slowness, as if he wanted to explore every curve, every space, every decision to stay. His breathing was already uneven, hers, warm against his neck. Melissa was surprised by her own body, how it responded, how it longed, how it remembered how to live. And Morgan's touch spoke a language she had long forgotten. To him, it was like touching something sacred, a living altar. There was no rush in undressing her. There was art. The sound of the zipper, the fabric slipping away, the shiver that ran through her when her skin met the warm air of the apartment. Everything was ritual. When she grabbed his shirt and pulled him closer, Morgan took her by the waist and laid her on the sofa with a kind of wild tenderness. She smiled against his lips, as if to say, "Go ahead, rediscover me completely." And he did. Between kisses that seemed endless, soft whispers and touches that slid like promises, Morgan thought that maybe everything he had built had only led him here, to that moment, to that body, to that woman who, without knowing, made him feel again. Melissa, completely surrendered, thought that maybe, finally, someone was touching her not just with desire but with truth. And there, among the makeshift sheets of the sofa and the night-keeping watch outside, two worlds collided, not with violence, but with hunger, with tenderness, with the kind of intensity that defies explanation. And for the first time, they both knew it wasn't just about pleasure, it was about recognition, and never wanting to go back to who they were before. They stayed like that for long minutes, the world outside completely forgotten. Everything felt simpler there, in the connection of two bodies that had found each other slowly, without rush, without urgency. Later, with the city asleep in the background and the forgotten drink still on the table, Melissa fell asleep leaning on his shoulder, her features relaxed, lips slightly parted in peace. Morgan looked at her in silence. He picked up a blanket and gently draped it over her shoulders. He sat there beside her, watching, for long seconds. There was something in that moment that no amount of money in the world could ever buy. Maybe, he thought, life made more sense when we stopped trying to understand everything and simply let ourselves feel. The morning sun crept gently through the gaps in the curtains, casting a golden glow across the wooden floor and the cushions scattered on the rug. Outside, the city had already awakened, but inside, time seemed suspended. Morgan opened his eyes slowly, his body still warm beneath the light blanket. For a moment he didn't move. He just lay there, absorbing the soft silence of the apartment, the delicate scent of flowers mingled with Melissa's perfume still lingering in the air. He turned his head slowly and saw her. Melissa was sleeping just inches from him, her face turned to the side, hair spread across the pillow and part of her bare shoulder. Her breathing was soft, rhythmic, almost silent, a trace of peace so genuine that his chest tightened unexpectedly. Morgan couldn't take his eyes off her. He gently ran his hand through her messy hair, brushing a strand away from her face with the care of someone touching something sacred. His fingers moved down along the curve of her neck to her uncovered shoulder, where they paused, just to feel her there, warm, real. The memory of the previous night returned with force. The muffled laughter, the kisses that grew between pauses and slow urgency, the way she reached for him without fear, the eyes that saw him as a man, not a surname, the way she gave herself, not just physically, but completely, fully. She wants nothing from me but what I already am, he thought, and that was new, disarming. He felt a rush of peace and fear at the same time. Peace from being close to someone who made him forget the world, and fear of losing that, of not knowing how to hold on. But in that moment, he decided not to think too much. He simply leaned in and pressed a light kiss to her forehead, as soft as the morning light. Melissa stirred slightly, letting out a breath that sounded almost childlike, and snuggled closer to him, still asleep. Morgan closed his eyes for a moment and smiled into the pillow. There were no meetings, no forecasts, no control, just her. And for the first time in a long time, he had no desire to be anywhere else. He got up quietly so as not to wake her. He decided to make a strong coffee, hoping to stretch the moment just a little longer. Wearing only the light shirt from the night before, sleeves rolled up, he moved silently as he prepared the coffee. Every movement was more delicate than usual, as if he didn't want to break the spell of what had just begun. The warm, bitter smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, blending with the soft scent of flowers in the living room. And that was what woke her. Melissa appeared in the hallway, still wrapped in the white sheet, hair tousled, her face serene. When she saw him from behind, fiddling with the cups, a smile escaped without asking permission. Morgan turned and smiled back, as if recognizing something precious. Neither of them said anything at first. They just stood there, smiling like people who know something important has changed. They sat at the small kitchen table. They ate pancakes, a few fruits, and drank coffee as if it were their 300th breakfast together. The gestures were soft, the glances constant, the words few but certain. At one point, Morgan rested his arms on the table and asked, his voice low but steady, "And the proposal? Still sound crazy? Or has it earned a chance?" Melissa played with the rim of her cup before answering, her eyes sparkling. "Yes, but with one condition." He raised his eyebrows, curious. "If you want to invest, you have to learn about flowers." Morgan smiled, surprised and utterly charmed. "Is that a threat?" "It's a commitment," she replied, raising her cup in a symbolic toast. He leaned in and kissed her gently, wrapping her in his arms with the certainty of everything that was unfolding. That afternoon they went together to the central flower market. Morgan followed her through the fragrant stalls and narrow aisles, eyes attentive, heart open. Melissa greeted vendors by name, received warm smiles, asked questions, sniffed eucalyptus crates and touched petals as if speaking to them in silence. He didn't say much. He just watched, absorbed. She explained the difference between dahlias and peonies, showed him how to spot a freshly cut rose and how to care for a rebellious orchid. Morgan took mental notes, stumbling over the names but memorizing every detail. "This place is you," he said during a pause, looking at her with sincere admiration. She smiled, not fully understanding. "What is?" "This. The passion, the calm, all of this. It's you." In the days that followed, Melissa and Morgan dove together into renovating the flower shop, not as people fixing a space, but as people restoring the soul of something that had always deserved more care. There was no rush, No pressure. Every detail was handled with affection, as if they were polishing an emotional inheritance, honoring the living memory of that place. They chose light-colored paints that let in more generous sunlight. They restored the wood of the facade with their own hands, treating every crack like a beautiful scar. They hung new lights, soft, warm ones, but kept everything that held history. The old pots, her mother's paintings, the handwritten order books, which now had their own shelf, like treasured relics on proud display. On the second floor, Melissa had an idea that lit her up from the inside. She set aside a small space to create a cafe, a cozy corner with light wood tables and hanging plants. "I want other loves to start here too," she said, smiling softly, casting a meaningful look at Morgan, who just watched her like someone already living that love. Amid paints, plants, and dust, she also began interviewing new staff. She wanted the shop to breathe, to move, to have new hands. She wanted to make room for the future, without erasing the past. It was in that spirit of rebuilding that Chloe appeared. She entered the shop unannounced, as she always did, but this time there was something different in her eyes. When she saw Melissa, she ran over and hugged her tightly, holding her like someone celebrating not just a victory, but a return. "You're glowing again, Mel," she said, emotional. "Because of this love, because of this shop, because of you." Melissa smiled through tears she didn't even try to hide. After so long in silence, it was as if her soul was finally speaking again. And Morgan was there in every detail, working by her side day after day, sweating, misnaming flowers, tripping over pots, and asking for the 10th time what a lisianthus was, but with lightness, with laughter, with something genuine he didn't know he still had in him. He was a man unaccustomed to the touch of simple things, but on that wooden and earthy floor, surrounded by flowers and her gaze nearby, he felt whole. He began to plan a surprise. Melissa noticed, of course. One night, curious, she confronted him with a playful smile. "Hiding something?" He only replied mysteriously, "It's a surprise, but when it arrives, you'll know." It was more than a gesture. It was a confirmation that he wasn't just investing in the shop, he was investing in her, in what they could build together. Morgan was finally feeling something money had never brought him: completeness. Not the kind of happiness that comes from success, but the kind that is born from human connection, from the ability to trust someone again. Melissa made him remember his humanity, the part he had buried under deals, targets, and losses over the years. One afternoon during renovations, hands stained with paint and her hair loosely tied, Melissa was tending to an orchid on the counter. Her eyes sparkled as she touched the plant, as if she were caring for something both fragile and sacred. Morgan approached silently from behind. He watched every movement, his heart full and racing. Then, without thinking, he murmured, "That's how you fix me too." Melissa froze, surprised by the confession. She turned slowly, didn't say anything, just touched his face gently with a quiet smile, like someone who already knew, but needed to hear it. It was true, and they both knew it. In that garden being reborn, they were already blooming through each other. The day of the reopening finally arrived. Before the sky even brightened, Melissa was already awake. Her heart beat to a different rhythm, between anxiety and a peace she hadn't felt in a long time. She drank a simple cup of coffee, standing in the kitchen, watching the bluish light begin to seep through the cracks of the window. Morgan was still asleep, peaceful, surrendered to the quiet of morning. She approached, watched him for a moment with tenderness, and left a soft kiss on his forehead before slipping out. The walk to the shop felt different that morning. The quiet streets, the fresh air, the muffled sound of her own footsteps. It was as if the world understood the magnitude of what was about to happen. When she arrived, she turned the key carefully and stepped inside. The space was silent, still in the dark, as if waiting for the right moment to awaken. Melissa slowly turned on the lights, revealing everything they had built together, every color, every arrangement, every detail. Soon after, Mark and Penelope arrived, two of the new hires she had chosen with her heart, and she had chosen well. Mark always brought contagious energy, the kind of person who turned simple tasks into joyful rituals. Penelope was calm, attentive to detail, delicate like someone who already understood the value of flowers even before learning their names. "Ready for a fresh start?" Melissa asked, smiling as she saw them. "We were born ready for this," Mark replied, lifting a box of bouquets. Penelope just smiled and placed a vase at the center of a table with almost ceremonial delicacy. Melissa watched them in motion, and her chest swelled with gratitude. She walked between the benches, checking arrangements, aligning little name tags, lighting small candles in the corner of the newly created cafe. Everything exuded life. She stopped for a moment in the center of the shop, turned slowly on her feet, and looked around. She took a deep breath. And there, surrounded by flowers, between smiles and natural light, she understood. She was living something that wasn't just a new professional chapter. It was a soul's rebirth. Her eyes filled quietly with tears. In silence, she brought a hand to her heart and looked toward the counter. Behind it, there was now a small reserved space, framed simply and discreetly, a photo of her parents. Her mother's gentle gaze, her father's quiet smile, both holding a bouquet together in the shop's old layout. Melissa smiled at the image, as if in gratitude. "We did it," she whispered, "just for them." The shop was beautiful. The freshly painted facade glowed softly under the morning sun, as if the light recognized it. The new gold sign, elegant and simple, displayed the name with both strength and sweetness, Aurora Flores. The arrangements filled the shelves with vibrant colors, as if celebrating something beyond spring. There was an energy in the air that couldn't be explained. It was the scent of dedication, of courage, of love, planted slowly. Melissa adjusted the last flower on the counter and closed her eyes for a moment. She felt the blessing of being there, whole, of having turned pain into roots, longing into bloom, memory into presence. And there, in the place where everything began again, she knew. She was exactly where she was meant to be. The shop was alive. Melissa was adjusting the final touches when she heard the soft chime of the door. She turned with a smile already ready and saw him there. Morgan walked in with the sunlight at his back and 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He wore a light shirt, sleeves rolled up as always, and the look of a man who was exactly where he wanted to be. She watched him approach, feeling her heart tighten in her chest in the best, most familiar way. He handed her one of the cups, and their fingers brushed with silent intimacy. "Brought reinforcements," he said, smiling. "You're right on time," Melissa replied. "Everything's ready." Morgan looked around, impressed by the result. But more than the visible beauty, what truly moved him was the energy in the air, a sense of true new beginnings, of something rebuilt with care, love, and bravery. He stepped closer, his other hand still in his blazer pocket. Melissa was just about to speak when she saw what he pulled out. A small blue velvet box. She froze for a moment, eyes fixed on the object as if unsure whether to smile or ask what it was. "What is that?" she whispered, surprised, almost breathless. Morgan didn't answer immediately. He just opened the box slowly. Inside, resting gently, was a silver key, accompanied by a small wooden keychain engraved with a flower. Melissa looked at him, confused, then at the key, then back at him. "It's..." Morgan nodded, his eyes steady but full of emotion. "It's ours, the new house, a place just for us. No rush, no pressure. Somewhere this thing we're building here can live out there too." Melissa brought her hand to her mouth, eyes filled with tears. It took her a moment to respond. When she finally did, her voice came out shaky, but overflowing with love. "You're completely insane, maybe, but now I know why." She smiled, tears in her eyes, and he stepped closer again, touching her face gently. "Good thing my car broke down that day," he murmured. "The car broke, but you fixed me." Melissa laughed through her tears, pressing her forehead to his, feeling that here in this shop, in this embrace, in this promise, something much greater than flowers had been born. And this time, it was meant to last. Just after the surprise, the doorbell rang again. First timidly, then with growing frequency. The neighbors began to arrive, an elderly couple from the bakery down the street, a young woman who always bought daisies for her grandmother, a man with his daughter perched on his shoulders. Each customer entered with a look of surprise at the new shop. Their eyes moved across the fresh facade, the vibrant arrangements, the small upstairs cafe with its floral little tables. But what struck them most was the atmosphere. There was something there that couldn't be explained. It was the kind of place where people let their shoulders relax, where they breathed deeper, where they felt seen. Mark and Penelope moved among the customers with agility and joy, handing out flowers, serving coffee, explaining the plant types with contagious enthusiasm. And Melissa moved with a new lightness, as if she had finally left pain in a space where it no longer led her steps. She greeted customers with a bright look in her eyes, touched the vases like old friends. Sometimes she exchanged glances with Morgan across the room, and in those moments, no words were needed. As the day began to wind down, the last rays of sun stretched through the front windows. The shop fell silent again, now bathed in soft golden light. The doors were closed. The bell rang one last time. Melissa and Morgan were alone among empty boxes, fallen petals, forgotten mugs, and smiles still lingering in the air. He gathered a few papers from the counter, and she adjusted the last of the vases. They met in the center of the shop, said nothing, just looked at each other. Melissa walked to him, took his hand with both firmness and tenderness. Morgan pulled her close and wrapped her in a calm embrace, like someone holding a lifetime of new beginnings. They stood there embraced among the flowers. On the new golden sign above the entrance, the sunset light reflected softly. And just below the shop's name, a quiet inscription said everything without needing to explain. Where flowers bloom, and hearts too. And so between flowers, silences, and small gestures, two lives quietly found a new beginning. If this story touched you in any way, leave a comment below. I'd love to know what stayed with you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. There are many more heartfelt stories waiting for you here. You can click the card on the screen to watch another story that just might warm your heart, or the one next to it to explore the full playlist of stories here on the channel. See you there.